Hi folks, in light of my last video about what a defense attorney's role is, a criminal defense attorney's role is in a courtroom, I'd like to explain one other aspect of it. A lot of times a person gets charged with a crime or crimes, multiple crimes, and the state may come to the defendant, actually the defendant's attorney, and say, hey, would your client take a deal? And a deal is a plea agreement, meaning that the client, the defendant, will plead guilty to a certain charge in exchange for having the other charges dismissed or the exposure to a reduced sentence, but there's a benefit to the agreement, usually, not always. Sometimes it's just a lazy prosecutor saying, hey, you want to take this deal, and the deal is what you would probably get if you went to trial and lost. And that doesn't happen too often, but in the realm of DUIs, that usually is the case. Nonetheless, my theory is there's a deal to be had on everything in life, and two sides get together. They both give up something to get something, and they meet about halfway, and that's the way the saying goes. So contrary to, again, people thinking defense lawyers are there to get somebody off, that's not always the case. The state may offer a plea agreement because their case isn't solid. On the other hand, a defendant may take a plea agreement because he doesn't want to roll the dice. You never know what's going to happen in front of a jury of your peers, whether that be 6 people, 10 people, 12 people, 8 people, whatever. But you don't know. You can't climb inside somebody's head, and you don't know how well the state's case is going to go for them or how badly it is. And you don't know how well you're going to do as a defendant in rebutting that evidence if you, in fact, put on your own case. So a plea agreement is a contract between you and the state of Arizona, at least as it is here, or maybe the federal government in federal court. And it says you will plead out, I'll give you a hypothetical. You've been charged with 4 crimes, and you have huge exposure to potentially, let's say there are 4 armed robberies occurring on 4 different dates. That would allow the court, if in fact you went to trial and lost, to stack the sentence on each one of those because they're independent of each other, and it's 4 separate incidences on 4 separate occasions. So let's assume that's what you've been accused of. And the state comes to you and says, hey, we'll let you plead guilty to 1, we'll dismiss the other 3, so there's the benefit, you don't have that exposure anymore, and maybe they'll stipulate to probation so you don't end up in prison. Maybe they'll do what's called a no agreements offer, where it's completely up to the court, the judge who does the sentencing, within the confines of Arizona's sentencing laws or guidelines, whatever you want to call them. It's actually a chart. But to give you a sentence between probation with jail, or prison. And then prison in Arizona can be what defense lawyers, prosecutors call super mitigated, the presumptive term, and presumptive means just that, that's presumed what you're going to get, aggravated, which is more than the presumption, or super aggravated, which is way, way high. So if you go to trial, those are choices the judge can actually make. He can give you something less than the presumptive or more than the presumptive. So if you have a no agreements plea agreement and you're pleading out of 1, the judge has got that option. Typically, the plea agreements contain more, a stipulation that you will get probation or a stipulation that you'll go to prison, but the state won't ask for anything more than the presumptive. So then your lawyer can argue for you a mitigated term, something less than the presumptive. So you put on maybe a little mini trial, if you will, or a hearing about who you are, about why you should get less than the presumptive. You have relatives and friends show up for court and support you. Hey, this was a one-shot deal. You were an idiot just once. You've never been like that before. You're not going to be like that after, and the court should give you a break. I mean, that's sort of putting it in an abstract term, but that's really what it's all about. And it's selling you on the court so the court never sees you again. That's the argument you want to make, that this guy or girl is not going to offend in terms of committing another crime. And then if you get, let's say you get probation. As a condition of probation, you can go to jail. You can go to jail from 1 day up to a year, or you can have your jail deferred, hanging over your head the entire time. I should say the entire time, but let's say 6 months of jail is deferred, meaning you don't go to jail unless you screw up on probation. Then if you don't do certain things the court has ordered, you end up going to jail for 6 months, and maybe you get out to go to work, and maybe you don't. That's another issue. So again, there typically is a benefit to a plea agreement. The benefit to the victim of the crime is that they don't have to come in and testify in court. They're not put through hell, essentially, especially if it's something really heinous. And there's some certainty to it. Actually, there's a tremendous amount of certainty to it. Once you've pled out and you've been sentenced, to get out of that plea agreement down the road it's not impossible, but it's almost impossible. So then you're done. The victim doesn't have to show up anymore. They're done with having to deal with this in their life, and they can move on. And the theory is that justice is served because there's been a meeting halfway and everybody gets something out of it. Sometimes victims don't like plea agreements, and I understand why in some cases, but in some cases the state doesn't have such a great case, so if they get something against the defendant, then they consider it a win. Keep in mind, if you're the victim of a crime, the state is not your attorney. They're there for the state of Arizona, for the government, just like the federal prosecutors are. They're there for the United States government. They're not there for you. I mean, they take into consideration victims' rights, but they're not your lawyer. And if you feel you need representation as a victim, then you should hire your own attorney that can go in there and argue things on your behalf. So that's what a plea agreement is. It's really a contract between you and the government stating you're going to plead guilty to a certain crime or maybe crimes in exchange for the dismissal of other crimes or the reduction of the potential sentence on the crimes you're pleading out to, or a reduction actually in the crime itself. Like instead of aggravated assault, dangerous, it becomes aggravated assault without the dangerous label, which means that it's not mandatory prison and your exposure to prison has been reduced considerably, and you're actually probation eligible in a situation like that. I hope that gives you a little bit of insight in terms of what happens in a courtroom, or actually behind the scenes in terms of plea negotiations. Thank you. If you have any questions or ideas for these video topics, please email me at lawyer@chuckfranklin.com. That's lawyer@chuckfranklin.com. And I'll consider your topic, and maybe you'll see yourself on my video channel.
For more videos or to learn more about your rights, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube page, or visit us online at chuckfranklinlaw.com.